of data, or it is a finance data, or it is a customer data, or it is a custom data, or it is a supplier data. All kind of data we can create by using this data model. And not only just having the data, also it having certain relationship with the data. So let's say this is data model, and if I go to this, what is entity type, what is entity, that I will come all little later. So now you can see under this particular data model, there are some certain data. Now always remember, every single record which is present in the data model, that having some certain purpose. Let's say if I go by description, then we will come to know what is the purpose. See, let's say I will majorly talk about the major entity types. So this is the entity types for classification data. This is the entity type for class data. This is the entity type for material basic information. Similarly, this is the entity type which is contain the material purchase data. This is the entity type which maintain the or contain the material sales data. Similarly, this is the entity type which contain the material characteristics data. This is the entity type which contain the material plant data. So that means whatever the entity types are present, this is not only for data model. Even if I go to BP, similarly, so this is the entity type for address details. This is the entity type for country details. This is the entity type for email address. This is the entity type for let me talk about the major entity types. Customer tax details. Then this is the entity type for business partner central data. This is the entity type for the header address data of business partners. So that means every single detail, I can say it is a detail. Let's not get into entity types, because entity types and entity both are the different concept altogether. I can say all the details, whatever it is present inside the data model, it has some certain significance, some certain necessity to have here. So this is, and now I'm coming to the what is called entity. Entity means nothing but it's an attribute. So what is called attribute? Like material number. Material number is one attribute. Like field, I can say in the table field. Material type, industry sector, then old material number. So these are all nothing but entity or attribute. What is called entity type? The entity type is when it is a group of attributes, group of entities or attributes. Then we call it as an entity type. Let's say, let me take the example of material. So under data model, Mattner is an important entity type. So here material is an important entity type. What we have inside the material entity type, then I'm going to the attribute level. So entity type contains attributes, and there can be n number of attributes. There cannot be any certain limit for having any certain attribute. There can be some custom attribute. There can be some standard attribute. So these are all attribute. Which are those attribute, by the way? These are all attribute like old material number, then net weight, gross weight, then mm, then let's say base unit of measure, then material group, then lab office, then material type, then cross plant status, then so these are all, and also having some custom attribute as well. So this is nothing but entity type. Also entity type contained not only the attribute, the relative data element, of course, because if I go to table concept quickly, SE11 is for above data dictionary. So data dictionary is such kind of concept where basically we talk about the table, structure, data element, some sort of domain. These are all activity. First of all, this is for those who are not really understand the table concept in SAP. So table concept in SAP is basically we have field. Based on field we have some data element, and based on data element we have some certain domain. This is how the field aligned. Now the field is the one which is the most the most top layer which we see at the table level. So let's say I'm going to the Mara table. I display this, and what I see in the Mara table, that is the field. These are all nothing but the field, which is a part of my material master data. So this is nothing but field. But this field, let's say Z test. Z test is the field, but what exactly the field characteristics will be? What will be the soul will be of this particular field? The soul or characteristics or whatever you call, that we define in the data element level. So let's say I'm saying it will be character 10. That means the soul of the field will be, it will be work as like can contain the character data, including all kind of words A to Z and 0 to 99, or means any number it can take. Character means not only the words, also the numeric values as well. Okay, so this is nothing but the character, and also the length of this particular field will be 10. That is the nature of this field which I am assigning here in the data element level. So if you see here, let's say this is the field. What is the nature of the field? Matna. Now you can say, but here you have mentioned the character 10. Yes. Now, if you dig into this data element, then you can see data element contain domain. So this is the domain. Data element contain domain. That means domain is the last layer, which actually contain the soul of the field, or the real characteristics of the field. So here it should be a character 18. So similarly, for any other field, let's say for material type. Data element is material type, and what is the domain? Character 4. So this is the concept of a table in SAP. We have field, data element, and domain. And field can contain the data. So this is the Marathi related information. Similarly, if I go for LFA1 table, so LFA1 table is the table for vendor master data, which also having this field, data element, and domain, as usual the same concept, which contain the vendor master related information. Similarly, LFB1. LFB1 also related to the vendor master data, but it is related to the company code, because the previous table which you have seen, LFA1, it is for general data. Like what kind of general data I'm talking about? Like the name, the vendor name, the city, the district, and PO box, the postal code, the region or province, and the house number, address, and all. This is nothing but the vendor general information. When I'm coming to the LFB1, it is based on the company code. Like what is the vendor master company code? Name of the person who has created this particular company code. And many other details are there related to the company code. Similarly, we have another table for KNA1. This is for customer master data, which is a general data. Like again, the customer number, customer country, the region, the detail about the customer. Similarly, we have KNB1, which is customer related company codes. So these are all different tables which contain the different records. Okay. So here, so what I was talking about here, entity type and attribute. So similarly, if you see the entity type, it also having some sort of attribute and data element, and then data element will contain the actual characteristics, that how many characteristics it has, or is this a string one, or is this a only numeric value attribute. So these are all activity it will have. So this entity type will have many other things which we will talk about slowly, but this is the entity type which contain the group of attribute. Now as we have different type of entity types, like we have material is one type of entity type, like let's say valuation is for characteristics, which is another type of entity type. So these are all entity types are lined up here. But now how they relate with each other? Here it is just a definition. We are defining here, but how they connect with each other, how they understand that, okay, that material type will understand, okay, I have a relation with classification, or I have a relation with characteristics, because based on the material type, definitely the material characteristics will be changed. The kind of characteristics we will have for let's say for ice cream, definitely biscuit as a material will have a different characteristics. So that's what this relation, how we maintain. So we have a relationship. Here we maintain different kind of relationship. Again, we have a different kind of type of relationships we have, that we will come talk about slowly. Now, Without wasting the time and without just simply theoretically discuss the thing, let's quickly jump and create one scenario. So first scenario, as we discussed, first scenario I will talk about related to the custom data model. So why I'm taking the custom data model first instead of talking about the standard data model? Because if you will start with the custom data model, then you will come to know that from scratch how I have to deal with the data model. However, majority project you need not to have this custom data model. You will have the standard data model only, which you need to enhance it. Basically, you will have the enhancement to do. But first I will start with the custom data model that will give a major understanding when you will go for a standard or enhancement that will help you. Now in the custom data model, I want to create one certain data model. So first, the T code is MDG IMG. This is the T code for related to any kind of data model activity. General settings, data model, edit data model. So here I'm creating one new entry. Let's say YB is the data model. Description is, let's say, airline application. I will, because custom means what? It should not, it should neither material data, nor it will be vendor data, nor it will be customer data, nor it will be finance data. It will be something different type of data. So that's what I'm taking the airline application for an example.
Can I say that info record is can also be one custom data model, info record or source list?
Yes, like another example I can give, that is material media asset partners, or let's say uh, the manufacturing data, let's say the vehicle manufacturing data. Okay, so these are all nothing but the data. However, within this record also somehow you will get the detail about material and all, but it is another type of data which is not really associated with material, vendor, customer, or this. That kind of data we separate and we make it as a different data model for that. So this is the data model name I have given. This is the description I have given. Now active area and staging area we know. At this moment I'm not providing any active area. Let's keep it blank. Save it and save it in your proper task. So now if I go back, so here one thing is very important to observe, that is, this is the data model name, this is the description, this is the user who has been created this data model, this is the date when the data model has been created, and this is the time and the active version. This active version means we have basically three different active versions. One is same. Same means when the data model is in activated mode, let's say data model or BP data model or finance data model. So these are all data model which is in active mode, means whatever the changes are required that has been done and then activated. Why activation is important? In SAP there is something called activation. Activation means whatever the changes I'm doing being a consultant, that has to be activated. Means first I will check the syntax error. While I'm doing the activation, first it will check the syntax error. Do I have any syntax error whatever I have done, whether I'm writing some code or whether I'm making some data model, all will have the syntax check at the back end. So whenever I will try to do the activation, first it will do the syntax check. While doing the syntax check, it will just intimate me that if I made any certain mistake there. So those things will come as an error. And then those things I have to rectify and I have to fix it. Then only I can able to activate. So when I will activate, what will happen? The entire changes which I made, that will be synced with across the system along with the database level. So then that particular activity will start working as expected. So now here, when I'm saying my data model is same, that means my data model is in active state. And when it is in active state, that means whatever the data is there inside the data model, that can be ready to use. The relationship what is maintained in the data model, that can be ready to use. So the entire data model in force within this particular framework. Now another type of active version you can see, which is none. None means when the data model you create the very first time, when it has nothing. See, this is the data model which I have created the very first time. Then slowly I will add all those entity, all those attributes and all. But I haven't activated yet, just I saved it. Until and unless I activate it, this data model I cannot use anymore in my business. First I need to activate it. So any kind of code, if I say for an example, if I will not activate that piece of code, that code I will not able to use it. Similarly, until and unless I activate the data model, this data model I cannot use in my framework. So the very first time when I create some data model and just save it, that time the active version will show as none. It is not activated at all. It is just saved it. Okay. Now another type of active version we have, that is something called different. Let me show you that. Let's say this is the data model which is already activated. Right now the status is activated. Now I'm trying to modify this data model. Let's say I want to add one custom field here. So let's see. Okay. Custom field 3. Fine. Save it. Enter. So what will happen? This attribute will be added along with the data model. Now, when it is added in the data model, that means what? The
Unmuted.
Aditya, looks like your voice is breaking. Hello?
is this fine now?
Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay. Okay. So what I was talking about, So let's say I'm adding one attribute in the data model level. Then this at whenever before adding this attribute, whatever the structure I had, now the structure has been changed because I have added this attribute. So the existing structure has been broken. Now I need to reconstruct the structure because in this new structure I have this new field, but for that I need to activate. Okay, that I will come later. But before I activate, what I see the status. Before I activate, I can see the status is different. That means so far whatever the activities I have done, my data model was in active state. I changed it. I have added one new field. I have changed somehow the data model and I saved it. I haven't activated at all. If you go there, I haven't activated at all. Still, it is the modification happened and then saved. That's what the version it is showing, it is different. So that means the different version is whenever you make some modification with the activated data model and just saved it, not activate, then this particular data model status will be different. Now you can ask me, tell me, as this data model is not active, will this data model be a part of this business? No. At this moment, as my data model is not in active state, I cannot use this data model. First, I need to activate the data model. It is always a thumb rule. Whatever the activity you are doing in SAP, first you need to activate it. Otherwise, that will not able to use anywhere in the framework. Okay. So similarly, you have to first activate it. Okay, I will activate later this material. Let's concentrate on the new data model which I'm creating here. So that means this difference we see here, that what are those different active versions we have, that is none, different and same, with some example. Now here I'm trying to add the entity type. First I will create the entity type. So again, what is entity type? Entity type is a group of entities which hold some certain relative information. Okay. Now under this particular data model, let's say I'm taking the entity type as carrier. So airline application, if I go to airline related table, so we have a table called S flight, which is related to the airline detail. So we have a carrier ID that is nothing but the airline code, and then currency of the local currency of airline. So these are all then connection number, then these are all important details. So first I'm taking the carrier ID. So so here I'm just defining as car. Now whenever I'm defining the entity type, then I have to define what will be the usage type or the storage type. That means this entity I'm creating, that is fine, but what will be the behavior of the entity type, how they react in this framework, how they store the data, how in this particular entity type whatever the data will be there, how they will behave in this framework. That is nothing but storage or use type. Now in the MDG framework we have a different type of storage type. We have basically in a very common term we use type 1, type 2, type 3 and type 4. So in common term, we use type 1, type 2, type 3 and type 4. So if someone will ask you the question that how many different storage type we have, you can say we have a 4 different storage type, that is type 1, type 2, type 3 and type 4. But it has some certain name from SAP's point of view. The first one is changeable via change request generated database table. So if I write here changeable via change request and generated table. Okay. Changeable via change request generated table. Generated database table. This is the database table. This one. Now by this description you cannot remember this exact activity. It is never possible. Just by this description you will remember what exactly this storage type will do. For that you have to understand what is the activity for this storage type. Whoever the entity type we define as a type 1, by this description it is quite clear those entity type values can be possible to change via change request. Point number 1, that is changeable via change request. And the next point is whatever the value we have inside this entity type, that will go to the database table. Now for an example, the example is like material. Material is entity type. What are those details we have in the material? Like material type, material group, material group, then industry sector, then unit of measure. So these are all nothing but the inside attributes under this particular material entity type. So that means whatever the attributes are there, those attributes are changeable. Definitely through change request, the value of material type I can change, the value of material group I can change, the value of industry sector I can change, the value of unit of measure I can change, and those values are going to the database table ultimately after processing all those activity. This is nothing but type 1. Okay, and these are all the basic information. The another point is these information are the basic information. Majorly those entity types are type 1 which hold the basic information. Without material type, without material group, without unit of measure, can we expect any material? No. We cannot imagine one material without material type, without industry sector. So that's what this type 1 is, a very important entity type. It's a very important type which is basically talk about the major entity type within the data model. Now as I said, respect to material is a type 1 entity type. So respect to one second, let me save this. Okay, definitely it will show you the error because I haven't filled this information. Okay, let me go back. So here under so material is the entity type, which is the major entity type in data model. Okay. Now for BP, what is that? For BP, it is BP header. BP header, see, this is also type 1. So BP header, which hold what kind of information? BP header basically hold the header details of BP, business partner ID, business partner group, business partner type, and many other important information. So that's what this is, nothing but the major entity type 1. So that means whatever the data model we have certain type 1 entities. Okay. Similarly, BP, it is BP header. Okay. So this is nothing but type 1. Then I will come to type 4, because type 1 having a direct relation with type 4. What is type 4? If I go by the description, uh, the type 4 is changeable via other entity type and generated database table. So again, changeable via other entity type and generated database table. Then again, what is the meaning for that? The description is, it is pretty clear. So that means the entity type which will be type 4, this will be changed by the other entity type. What kind of other entity type? By type 1. So I can say type 1, type 4. So that means type 4 always looking at type 1, because it is changeable via other entity type, type 1. Why? Let me give you one example. The example is, let's say my material is oil. What is the what is the classification of the oil? The classification of the oil is petrol. Then again, there will be some certain characteristics. But whenever my material is getting changed, let's say biscuit. What is the classification of the biscuit? Then immediately the classification gets changed and it will be like cream biscuit. That means based on the material, my classification and as well as the characteristics will be changed. That means class and characteristics is always looking at material level, that what kind of material I'm really defining. Whatever the material I will define, based on that the classification and characteristics will be. So that's what the class and characteristics will be a type 4 entity type, which will be always depend on material, which is type 1. This is nothing but type 4 entity type. Now, coming to the another type, which is type 3. What is the description? The description is not changeable via MDG. No, yeah, one more point here. Whatever the data it will have, that will finally go to the database table, like classification data, characteristics detail, that all going to the respective database table. Now coming to type 3. Not changeable via MDG, no generated table. So this is not changeable via MDG, no generated table. So here This is the type 3. Now, by seeing this description, you will not understand anything. So you have to understand what is the logic to identify that which entity type will be type 3. The easy way to identification is the entity type which I am using in my framework. If that particular entity type values are coming from the domain level values, if those entity type values are coming from the domain level, then this kind of entity type we call it as a type 3. For an example, let's say currency. So we have here, I was talking about this currency field in airline table, this currency field. So currency, as it is a field, also it can be a entity type. So being an entity type, currency value is coming from where? Let's see. So this is the field, this is the data element. Now this is data element, this is domain. Going to the domain level, go to value range. Here we have a value table. Here this is the currency for different country based, and then display. See, these are all different currency where we have USD, INR, uh, uh, Japanese yen. These are all different currencies. So that means this particular field value is coming from the domain level, because at the domain level we have value table added. So this is the value table. So from the value table, this data is actually populating. Okay. So this is the currency also can be entity type. It is not only field, it can also be an entity type. So this type of entity type where the value is actually coming from the domain specific level, that type of entity type we call it as a type 3. Now coming to type 2. The type 2 is, sorry, the type 2, if I go by the description, changeable without change request, generated check table. Changeable without change request and generated check table. So now what is that? So whatever we are discussing so far, if I talk about in last class, whatever we discussed, all the time I try to impose one thing, that is whatever the activities I'm doing here, that will be the real output we will see through the change request. So change request is nothing but a form which, like at this moment, I think I already shown you the change request. So the change request is nothing but a form which contain the different details of specific master data. So all the time, so whenever we will create some material data, whenever we will change some master data, whenever we will modify some or mark for deletion some master data, or whenever we will do the mass change, file upload, file download, data import, whatever the activity I'm doing here, that will be based on the change request. Okay. So Why change request? Why I'm taking the change request in count in this particular MDG framework? The idea is whenever you are using the change request, you have unique change request number. So based on the unique change request number, you can identify that how many change request has been created by Mr. A and what is that kind of change request he has been created. What is the type of change request he has been created. Similarly, how many change request has been created by Mr. B and what is the type of change request he has been created. So these are all identification will be pretty easy when I will go by the change request. So that's what MDG framework is required change request. Now here in this statement, it is saying something absolutely different. It is saying changeable without change request. That means if I talk about first point, the material type, industry sector, unit of measure, these are all value. We are changing on change request only. Some change request we maintain the unit of measure value is, let's say, EA. Some change request we are mentioning the unit of measure value is K or some other value. So that means the value is keeping, it's changing based on the requirement, and that is with the help of the change request, not automatically, with the help of the change request. But here it is saying that the value will be changeable without change request. So you need not to do all those changes based on the change request. The value will be changed automatically without the knowledge of change request. Then this type of change, this type of data, it is very difficult to track for consultant, for us as a developer or as an end user, I can say. Why? Because for specific material, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, because this 1, 2, 3, 4 material I'm creating by using the change request. So whenever I will open the change request, I will come to know this 1, 2, 3, 4 material having what are those material type, what is the unit of measure, what is the industry sector, all those details. But here, what will happen? The value will keep change. I will see some value in the change request level, but at the table level, the value is something different because the value is keep changing. It is not awaiting for change request. So this type of field or this type of entity types, we call it as a type 2. For an example, I can give you so these are all, sorry. So let's say the variance key, and particularly this is the one of the CAS number for pharmaceutical product in foreign trade. So this is a specific type of entity type, basically those entity type which is related to the custom data. Means I'm not talking about the custom data means the Z or X data. I'm talking about the foreign trade which is having the value which depends on the custom trade. That type of values are keep changing without the change request based on the different foreign trade informations. So this is one of the example I can take for a type 2. Now this type 2 entity type you will hardly use in your framework. If I talk about my experience, I'm in this MDG world almost 5 years. Only MDG world. And whatever the project I have done, none of the project I have seen to use type 2. Because type 2 is absolutely the against of the rule. And it is very difficult to track. But what is my intention here to create the framework? Is my intention to create something which is unable to track? No. The intention to create the framework is to make sure the entire framework should be transparent. That is my intention. So that's what you can say 99% client will not use type 2. At least I haven't used in my lifetime type 2. But then the question comes, why this type 2 is a part of the data model? Definitely SAP as a source of the organization, they cannot skip the data. They cannot skip the information. They will provide all those information, but it is up to your customer whether they will accept it or not. It is up to your customer whether they want to bring such kind of framework within this this transparent framework. It is up to them. So this is another type of entity type. But majorly we will talk about in MDG or whatever the stuff, 99.99% you will work on type 1, type 3 and type 4. So always give a concentration on type 1, type 3, type 4. This is the major entity types which you need to deal in MDG level.
Aditya, I have one question here.
Yeah.
Or I should wait. Okay. So when you are talking about type 2 and you referred that the foreign trade table, so in that foreign trade entity type, we have HS code, the harmonization system code. So that gets fluctuating. That does not get fluctuated, but that is actually a manufacturing. Who is the manufacturer? They assign one code to the particular material. So in that case, the entire foreign trade import and foreign trade export view which we have from the material in SAP, so those two are type 2, right? But we use it and we enforce the user to fill that value. So then what is the
No,
relation?
not that one, not that one. The one which you are trying to use based on the manufacture detail, that is not the one. It is something, the foreign trade value is something, let's say, some sort of value which change based on some country specific, not exactly the manufacturing specific. Manufacturing specific is something which we can link with the type 4. That cannot be type 2 because manufacture is part of type 1, and when it is linked with any other entity type, that will be type 4. So the type 2 which I am talking about, it is absolutely different. It is neither relation with type 1 nor relation with type 3, nor it will have a relation with type 4 as well. It is changed based on some other condition. Then it is considerable as a type 2. The example which you have given based on the manufacturer number, my foreign trade numbers are getting changed. That is nothing but the relationship in between the type 1 and type 4, not type 2. Let's not go by the description. As it is a foreign trade, so you are talking about, okay, it is a foreign trade. No. Let's go by the relationship. Let's go by the concept. What does it mean? Why when manufacturing, based on manufacturing or based on unit of measure or based on material type, some foreign trade value also keep change. That is also happening. So in that case, how we will define it? Will you define it as a type 2? No. It is a type 1 and type 4 relationship where the foreign trade values are depending on type 1. Okay, type 2 is something which is not in relation with type 1, type 3 and type 4. The value is keep changing apart from this type. That type of types we call consider is as a type 2. Okay, so now going back to the data model. So here the carrier entity type. So now these are all different storage type I have, as I explained. So now I want, so carrier type is what? Carrier ID is nothing but it's a flight information. So what type of entity type it can be? It will be a prime entity type. It will be a leading entity type, which is nothing but my type 1. So without flight number, I cannot say what is the currency of that particular flight, what is the connection between these flight destinations. That so these are all information I cannot able to use that without the flight number. So that's what this carrier ID is always a type 1 entity type. Okay, now we will create another type as well, but this type will be a type 1. Why? Because based on the carrier ID, all those information, the flight description, the currency of the flight, the URL of this airlines detail, the connection about the flight, these are all information will be coming based on the flight number. Okay, now the validity, whether this particular entity type is edition dependent or edition independent. What is the meaning of this edition dependent and independent? That means right now I'm working on 7.0. So whenever the migration will happen from 7.0 to 8.0, based on this MD edition, will my data model change? First of all, if I make it as a edition specific, then this data model will be only applicable within this edition 7.0. I cannot use this in 8.0 or 9.0 or any other edition. But whenever I will mention it is a non-edition, that means even though the migration happened from 7.0 to 8.0 or 9.0, this data model will be keep as it is, and I can able to access this data model as it is. So that's what this is the edition dependent. Then the data element. What is the data element for carrier ID? So if I go to S-flight table, and this is the carrier ID field, and this is the data element for that. So here it is a field, but in my MDG framework, I'm taking it as a carrier. I'm taking it as a entity type. I'm taking it as an entity type.
Aditya,
Yeah.
here you have already an table, so you are directly taking the data element for that particular entity type. So for us, like whenever we will be making a completely new entity type, so suppose it is MDG versus a non-SAP
I
platform.
have
Okay.
I have this example as well. Just hold on. Just hold on. I have this example in next class. Like if it is a purely a custom entity type, how the data element will be, how the storage type will be, how the relationship will be defined with custom entity type with the standard entity type. These are all things I will talk about. Hold on, one by one I will do. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So first, this is the data element. So that means what I'm trying to say, by using this data element. That means this is the carrier ID. This entity type will behave also as a attribute, and this entity type will also have some certain attribute as well. Let me complete this, then you will come to know what exactly I'm trying to do here. Then rest of the informations are like what will be the length of this. Let's say I'm taking the length of some length, medium length I have taken for this particular entity type. And also the deletion. Is deletion allowed for this particular entity type or not? If yes, then it will be deletion allowed. That means latter point of time, can I able to delete this entity type? Yes, I can able to delete this entity type any point of time in future. Okay. There are other fields which I will talk about little later, not now. So one by one I'm going, that the intention is, if I will go step by step examples, then you will able to understand the entire whole activity. But if I will explain the whole thing in one shot, you will get confused. Why I'm using this? Why I'm not using that? So that's what I'm slowly going to the, there are many other examples which I will take respect to the data model, where slowly I will take some other angles we will show you. Okay. So now the description you can say as carrier ID of airline. So with this minimum details, I'm just saving it. That means what? That means carrier ID is an entity type which also behave as an attribute. That means it is itself is an attribute, okay, which hold the flight number or flight details. But along with that, I will, inside this particular entity type, I will create the airline URL. So where, because I just want to add the airline URL, because of that reason, the carrier ID I have taken as an entity type. So however it is an entity type, but it will behave also as a carrier ID as an attribute. And along with that, I'm going to add my another attribute, which is nothing but URL. So the data element is, let's say, s underscore carrier URL. Then airline URL. So this three minimum details at this moment I'm entering, which is the URL, data element is this one, this one. Now if I will make this particular checkbox check, that means this is a mandatory entry. This entry will be mandatory, but at this moment I don't want to make it as a mandatory. I just make it as a optional. Similarly, if I make this key field as check, that means it will behave as a primary field. It's a primary key. So we have a primary key and secondary key concept. So this field or this attribute will behave as a primary key. So that also I don't want to do, because my primary key is majorly the carrier ID, where which I have taken as a type 1. So automatically this entity type will be as a primary. Similarly, the search help. So is this URL values are coming from any search help? Search help means what? Search help means like whenever I click on material type, Based on material type, I can have a 10 different material type values. That is nothing but the search help values. So do I have any search help related to this URL? If I have, I can provide it. Where do you create the search help? In SE11. In SE11 data dictionary, we can create some search help. Okay. Also, the search help you can define in a programmatically, which we will see in particularly when I'm talking about the UI modeling. I will show you the example that how we can programmatically. I think someone made the login with the first option. Okay. What I was trying to talk about, that is URL. So here, what I was talking about, search help. So search help also I can add here, and also I can add along with the UI level. What is the difference between adding here and at the UI level? That I can make it in the UI level programmatically. When I'm adding the search help here in the data model level, this search help will be exist across the framework respect to this particular attribute. But if I will make it as a UI level, specific to that particular UI, that search help will be applicable. I will show you with example. Similarly, the currency and unit of measure is, if there is any currency or unit of measure field, we will create different currency entity type itself. So this is not important. If there is any relative structures or table associated with, we can provide that. But these are all things are not really required, because structured and table we defined in a different way to just extract the data from this data model. So these are all minimum information which is required to provide. So now what I can say, I have two values at this moment. One is carrier ID, which behave as an entity type, also as an attribute, and another value is URL. Now this is one entity type. Save it. Now I'm creating another entity type. So here another type of entity type I'm going to create. Let's say I'm creating the entity type which is currency. So currency will be what type of entity type? As we know that currency value is coming from the domain level. So this is the currency. So currency value is coming from the domain level. So definitely it will be behave as type 3. So which are those entity type values are coming from the domain level? Those entity types we will consider as a type 3 entity. Type 3. Similarly, the validity will be no addition. What will be the data element for that? The data element I can take here, this one. Simply I am taking the copy of the data element from the S flight table, which is based on currency. Okay. Now, if I want to give any length for that, I don't want to give any length for that. So whether you give it or not, then similarly the deletion is that particular entity type is can able to delete or not. That is one thing. Also, as I said, description, so it is a currency. If you want to add any specific structure or table, you can add here. If you want to add any specific field here, already it is a field. It will behave as a field. So I don't want to add any another field for that. If you want to add any specific search help for that, you can use here. So these are all different details.
But Aditya, if I put
Yeah,
the structure or the table over there, so does it mean that that table will be for permanent?
that
But that is the
that
reason why I'm
means
creating
that means if you provide any specific structure here, which again we will have another sort of example, that means this particular entity type will be a part of the structure across the framework. Okay, so we will see when we will talk about the customer vendor integration. That time I will show you, I will create one such kind of entity type where I will mention the structure here based on the entity type. So that means I want to keep that particular entity type respect to that particular structure across the framework. So
So
whatever the other entity types are there, or whatever the other structures are there, they can able to access this entity type. That is the intention, to provide the structure or table detail here.
okay, and when you are giving this description, it means that there will be one field which is always be attached to the other field. That is, the description is a separate field which is adjacent to this particular attribute, right? And that is across the
Yeah,
framework. Is it?
description means the description of this attribute, description of this entity type.
Okay. If it is a
This,
particular if it is a particular drop down kind of value, forget about the drop down. Like for example, suppose payment terms. Payment terms has several codes and several description, adjacent description
mm,
of them.
mm,
So does it mean that suppose when the user will use payment term as 01, so table
no,
immediately.
that's what you have to use search help for that. You have to use search help for that. Whenever it is a drop down or F4 help, you have to provide the necessary search help details for that. Then search help means what? Search help means, let's say, material type. Material type. Material type having 10 values. So there will be a search help. Whenever you click on search help, there will be M1, M2, M3, M4. So you can select this search help, or you can select the drop down. So whatever the value you want, you can select it. So if such kind of field it is, you have to go for the search help, but it is a entity type level. Also, if you want the payment term as a entity type, so then provide the relative search help here. So whatever the relative payment terms values are there, let's say 10 or 20 values are there, let's respect to payment term, that will be added along with the search help. So you have to create this separately, the search help in SE11. Then this value you have to add. Let's say for an example, let me save this. MM. See, this is one search help. This is for wet unit. See here, these are all search help parameters. Based on these parameters, we have certain values. So let's say AG. So these are all certain parameters, and based on that, the value will appear. Okay. So whatever the like based on unit of measure, based on industry sector, based on material type, based on BP, the let's say the postal code. So these are all things you can make it as a search help, specific search help for that. And those search help you can add it here. So this is entity type material. Under this we have some certain attribute, and this is the search help. So what will happen across the framework, this search help will be maintained. Similarly, this is the one. See, this is for unit of measure. So this is the unit of measure search help. Search help exit. So this is the piece of code which has been written. So based on which logic or based on which business rule the search help will be picked up. So unit of measure value, so base unit of measure. Similarly, we have for product hierarchy. So these are all different search help. And also, okay, so these are all values. So now here another
Aditya,
entity type which, sorry?
I have one question.
Sorry, I did not see the clock. Okay, so 1 minute, just 1 minute. So I have created now two entity type. One is carrier ID. Inside this carrier ID, we have just one attribute, and another entity type we have created, that is nothing but in currency. Based on the currency, we have given the respective storage type, data element, and the other details like if it is deletion or what, if I want to give any certain length or any search help detail or active area. Intentionally I don't want to discuss at this moment. I will come little later. Then structure, field and all. So far we have just discussed this two entity type, which is type 1 and type 2. So these two entity type also behave as an attribute. Don't forget that. It is not like that they are not behave as an attribute. Because I have given the data element value, that means they have behave like a attribute as well. That means carrier ID itself is a field. Inside carrier ID we have URL, that is also another field. Currency itself is a field, however it also behave as an entity type. The why I'm creating the entity type, majorly two different reason behind it. One is that inside the carrier ID I can maintain URL, that is one. Otherwise for URL again I have to create a separate entity type, that I don't want to do. Another thing is then I can make a relationship in between the carrier ID and URL currency. So the relationship always maintained based on the different entity types, not between the attributes. Relationship doesn't maintain between the attributes. It always maintain between the entity types. Okay, let's stop here today. The further discussions we will continue on Monday.
Aditya, I
Monday,
have one.
yeah. I will take the questions. Yeah,
Can you
yeah,
open the
please tell
currency?
me.
Can you open the currency entry type?
Okay.
Here you mentioned structure table. If you mention some table, does it mean
Hmm.
that it will affect a storage unit type, like entity will change? Here no
Let's
generated
say,
table.
let's say I'm adding this structure with this particular entity type. What will happen? This is the common structure. From this structure, let's say multiple other sources the data is picking. If I add my entity type along with this structure, that means this entity type will be accessible from the different point, from the different channel. That is the intention to provide the source structure and table. But for me, here why I'm not giving, because this value also I want to pick it up from the table, because I have already the dedicated table for that, that is S flight. In S flight table, I have already the currency field. So whoever is really want to fetch the data, they can fetch from the currency S flight table. That's what I don't need this additional structure to be assigned. But when I'm talking about the customer vendor integration, we have a concept called business partner. So business partner is the concept from where the customer is taking the data and vendor is also taking the data. So that means I have to place my entity type in such structure or in such a table where customer and vendor both can access that data. That is the intention here. If I will put it in LFA1 table, then it will be only accessible for vendor. If I will put it in KNA1 table, it will be only accessible for customer. But I need accessible for both of the agents, customer and vendor. That's what, this is one of the example where we enter the structure.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. I will come to that point because that is another set of discussion, customer vendor integration. That is another set of discussion. That time again I will create another entity, then I will assign that structure, then that time we will have that separate discussion.
Okay. Okay, Aditya, I have one question.
Yeah.
So when creating one entity type and under it, suppose we are assigning 10 separate attributes. So all the attributes characteristics are same, right? Whatever the entity type is there, suppose it is type 1, so all the fields inside it should
Yes, yes,
possess that.
yes. Will be behave as a type 1 only.
Okay. And another question I have, like you said that for a particular entity type, we can put n number of attributes, right? But there is some, there must be some recommendation. Otherwise, we will not be using any separate entity type, custom entity type. We should put all these standard entity type. We just make the Z fields and assign under the standard entity type only. Did you understand the question? If there is no
No,
limitation, okay.
I did not
My
understand your question.
okay. See, suppose LFA1 is the table, standard table,
Okay.
and suppose I am creating some Z fields, which is my target is non-SAP. Okay, so I have to
Hmm.
suppose create 10 Z fields, and what I am doing is I am not creating a separate entity type, but I am using the same LFA1 table. I am assigning these particular 10 Z fields under LFA1.
Okay.
LFA1 is also, it's a standard entity type, right? LFA1.
Hmm.
So now, if there is no problem adding 10 more fields, there will be no problem on the performance side, there will be no problem on the, so what SAP recommends, that you create separate entity type for a particular number of Z fields you are assigning, or you can use the standard one, which is existing.
No, this is not the concept. The concept is not the number of field you are adding in the table. It is concept for what purpose you are using this. When this is one type of example I'm discussing. When the next example I will talk about, particularly the enhancement case, that time I will talk about, let's say I'm adding two fields. Whether this two field will be under the standard entity type, or for that I have to create the separate entity type. It is not depend on the number of field you are adding in the table, custom field in the table. It is depend on what is the requirement for you. Based it, so far whatever I discussed, my very first point, if you remember, I said that every entity type which plays here, that is some purpose. So here, is that mean that only I have the custom field in the table level, that's what I have created the entity type here? No, there is a specific requirement. Why I am creating custom entity type? Why I'm not? Because custom entity type means that is also will be part of a custom attribute. Why I'm not including that custom attribute along with the standard entity type like material? There is a difference, and based on the requirement we need to do this. It is not simply that we are adding in the table level. So here, whether I'm adding it in the entity type, standard entity type or custom entity type, so not this one. It is absolutely based on the requirement. So I will take the cases where you will come to know that why I'm adding this custom field in the existing entity type, the standard entity type like material, and why I'm taking it as a separate custom entity type. Okay, so there is a difference between that.
Okay.
Is that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, fine. Any other question? We have just reached, I can say, hardly not even 10% of data model. So that's what, whatever the questions you are asking, that's what I segregated the entire data model into three different cases. One is custom data model, standard data model, and enhancement. Otherwise, it is very difficult to do the entire, providing the entire detail about the data model. That's what I segregated this. So I'm talking about one section at this moment, which is how to build up. Then I will come how to segregate, as the example which you are asking, that based on different custom field, how to segregate it. Okay. Okay. So today I'm closing the call here. So Monday, 8:30 a.m. morning, we will start. Okay. And the relative document I'm not sending at this moment. Still I'm in between the discussion. Let me complete this discussion, then I will send you the relative files. Okay.
Thank you, Aditya.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Bye.